All right, I think we've got a critical mass of people here. I want to welcome everybody to today's conversation about youth as catalysts for agricultural transformation. I'm Phil Karsting with the law firm Olson, Frank & Wiede, but I'm here today in my capacity as a board member of AgriCorps and as a senior advisor for the Secretariat for the movement to advance school-based agricultural education, which you will learn more about in just a few minutes. My connection to American agriculture began in a small town in Nebraska, where incidentally I wore a blue FFA jacket from time to time. More recently, I led USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service, which afforded me an opportunity to engage with agriculturalists across the globe. As all of you know, and as I came to see with my own eyes, systems of agricultural production vary immensely from country to country and continent to continent. Demographics, too, vary a great deal from one region to the next. Many regions facing the greatest agricultural challenges are also places experiencing a youth bulge, as demographers like to say. And those facts set the stage for our conversation today. By 2030, our planet will need to feed 9.7 billion people. In many of the regions of the world most at risk, that challenge is exacerbated by three driving forces: COVID, climate, and conflict. In other words, we have an all-hands-on-deck challenge ahead of us, and we need to maximize available resources to confront that challenge. At AgriCorps, we believe young people are an extraordinarily valuable human resource that can be transformational to agriculture. And we want to explore that topic in some detail today. We've assembled exceptional thought leaders. You can read their bios in the chat function. And as you will come to see, we have a collaborative vision of how we can make meaningful progress in this space. With that, I will hand the virtual microphone to Alicia Black-Miller, who will guide us through this conversation.
Great, thanks, Phil. And really happy to be here with today's panel and with all of you. Good to see some familiar faces popping up in the chat. Before we get started, I just want to give you a couple of kind of housekeeping notes. One is, as you might have already noticed, we're going to be inserting the bios in the chat box itself so that we don't spend too much time reading the bios, but we have a really distinguished and excellent panel. So check out their bios in that chat function. We'll also be including Twitter handles for people who are using them. So if you are active on social media, check out the chat box for those Twitter handles. And also want to remind people that we're going to be using the hashtag advance SBAE, so school-based agricultural education. So if you want to make sure people know you're part of this conversation in particular and follow that, use hashtag advance SBAE. One last piece of housekeeping is we will be taking questions from the audience, so please use the Q&A function. We'll probably begin the conversation with some pre-designed questions, but about halfway through we'll start taking questions from the audience, and we'll be trying to close the panel on time, so make sure you get them in early so that we can use those. So as I said, I'm really excited to be here with all of you. As Phil mentioned, I am now Vice President of Strategy and Partnerships for Digital Green. And it's actually fortuitous that I'm part of today's panel because yesterday Digital Green and IFPRI, as part of the Developing Local Extension Capacity program, launched a report on youth and extension lessons from Uganda and Rwanda. So we're going to be sharing that in the chat. So if you're interested in learning more about that, the DLEC initiative is supported by Feed the Future. We're very appreciative of that. And that might be adding a little bit of additional content to today's conversation. But moving to the conversation itself, I'm so pleased to be opening with Dr. Kwame Yeboah. Kwame and I had the good fortune to work together actually when I was at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and he was the author of a report that I'd also direct you to check out called Youth for Growth, that really explains this topic of youth in agriculture and what it will mean for youth and what it means for agriculture. And so I'm pleased to be working with you again, Kwame. It's good to see you and to be in this conversation. And you have such a depth of experience and knowledge. I'm hoping you can sort of set the table. So as Phil said, people are familiar with the rise in youth populations. They know that it presents an incredible opportunity, sometimes referred to as the youth dividend, but also great risk, the youth bulge, or sort of, you hear people talk about the threat of rising youth populations. And we often discuss needing to harness the potential and energy of youth. But I think we don't really know what that means. So can you give us a little bit more about the background itself and then talk about what it means to support youth and really harness their potential?
Alicia, thank you very much for the question. Let me begin by first thanking the organizers for this opportunity to join this distinguished panelists to discuss such an important topic, which I'm very passionate about. And I would want to begin by saying that over 60% of Africa's population is below the age of 25. And what that means is that Africa's present and its immediate future is actually very young. So there cannot be any talk about transformation on the continent without talking about young people on the continent. They will fundamentally shape the nature and the kind of transformation that the continent experiences. And regarding your question about what will these young people need, I believe that to effectively harness the energy for social and economic development, I think three fundamental things are needed. Now, the first is they need to be well fed and healthy. They need to be well educated, and they need to be gainfully employed. The unfortunate part of it is these seem to be in short supply on the continent at the moment. That even before the COVID pandemic, we have 1 in 4 persons in Sub-Saharan Africa was food insecure. 1 in 3 children under 5 years old was stunted due to malnutrition. And then Africa is increasingly reliant on food imports, so which stood about $65 billion in 2017. Again, there's also a learning crisis in schools that have left many African graduates without a relevant skill that is befitting of the 21st century workforce. And then there is the issue of a huge employment challenge, that the gap between the number of young people that is entering the labor force each year and available employment opportunities in the formal wage sector widens by about 8 million. So these are present challenges that the continent faces. And agriculture, if it is productive, has the potential to address some of these challenges. And if you're able to make those necessary investment to promote broad-based agriculture productivity growth, it will, first of all, be able to raise incomes of the millions of young Africans and their families who depend on agriculture for their livelihood, and allow them to make the necessary investments in quality education and human capital. It will also increase the competitiveness and the resilience of local food production systems so that Africa will be able to feed itself. But then more importantly, because of the strong linkages with the rest of the economy, agriculture productivity will generate the growth multipliers that will create jobs in the overall economy. And from my own analysis, we know that African countries like Rwanda, Ghana, Ethiopia, who invested in agriculture productivity over the past decade, also experienced the most rapid exit of labor out of agriculture and the highest growth in labor productivity in the non-farm sector. Right, so productivity in the agricultural sector is going to be key. So, which then leads me to the question of, so where does school-based ag education fit into this broad scheme? Personally, I think school-based ag education is going to be pivotal in addressing the knowledge, skills, and the technology adoption constraints to agricultural productivity growth. And I say that from the standpoint that at the current rate of employment growth, many young Africans would end up in agriculture or related informal services for their livelihood. School-based agricultural education offers a critical pathway to equipping these young people with the skills, industry-specific knowledge, and the and the technologies and things that they need to be successful in this particular sector, in an agriculture sector that is also increasingly becoming knowledge intensive. I would also say that school-based ag education will also empower these young people to be effective agents for agriculture technology transfer in the community, in their communities, which is quite similar to what 4-H and the FFA did to help promote ag transformation in the US itself. So in the interest of time, I'll pause here and I'll be happy to share some more light as the conversation unfolds.
Great, thank you, Kwame. And you set the table well here. And in my excitement to talk to you and ask a question, I neglected to mention your title. So for those who don't know Dr. Yeboah, he's an assistant professor of international development at Michigan State University. And he also provides administrative and leadership oversight for the MasterCard Foundation Scholars Program at Michigan State. So he will be able to help us understand the evidence as it relates to youth and agriculture throughout today's conversations. Thanks, Kwame, for your opening remarks. Trent, I'm going to move on to you. So Kwame has really explained how school-based agriculture education can play a role in equipping young people, as we heard about the sort of context in Africa and the need for them to be ready to enter agriculture and other fields. You are the founder and president of AgriCorps, and you also benefited from school-based agriculture education personally and felt so strongly about it that you have helped to bring it to many other places as well. So I'm interested, can you talk about what school-based ag education looks like, especially in a few different places, and really what's at the core of it? What does the experience look like in the US? What might it look like in Liberia? But what's common to school-based ag education?
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. I'm a cattle rancher from West Texas. So first and foremost, I'm rooted in production agriculture, but I'm also a product of school-based agricultural education. Growing up in 4-H and the FFA, I had the great opportunity to serve as the national FFA president. But through that experience, I also came to understand the impact, as Dr. Yeboah had mentioned, the impact of these types of organizations, not just on youth, but on agricultural development of the United States as well. And I began working internationally about 10 years ago and realized the impact that youth have had and could have through a mechanism such as school-based agricultural education. And there really are some really interesting similarities. I want to share with you, see if I can share my screen here, what the school-based agricultural education system really looks like. And it starts with a collaboration of partners, Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Education, an agriculture student organization such as 4-H or FFA, Future Farmers, Young Farmers types of organizations, the private sector, because they have a lot of different innovations and methodologies and technologies to diffuse. All of that goes towards these teacher trainings that ultimately impact teachers, because they're the ones who are taking these ideas back into the community, delivering them to students through this 4-component agricultural education model, which arrives at youth outcomes of cash, confidence, competence, and ultimately these community transformations. So youth, school-based agriculture education is not only contributing to just the academic, vocational, and life skills of youth through learn by doing methods, but it's also improving the rural livelihoods by transferring skills and agriculture innovations into the home and community through schools. And the core of this is really through this centerpiece here, which is the agriculture education model. And there are 4 components to this ag ed model. Which it really starts first with training teachers. This is a photo from a recent agriculture teacher training, all masked up, COVID masked up in Liberia that was hosted a month ago, training junior high agriculture teachers to go back into junior high schools. But the 4 components are classroom instruction, which is your traditional chalk and talk, where students are learning the abstract theories of science and agriculture. They apply that on a school demonstration farm. This is mounded cassava, so there's always some type of a improved methodology or technology that's being transferred into the community. The students then take those ideas and they have their own home entrepreneurship projects where they are learning and earning. That could be livestock, like this young man with his pig. It could be crops, it could be a vegetable garden, it could be, I've seen lots of different things across Ghana and Liberia. And then also teaching life skills, core life skills, public speaking, how to run a meeting, communication, teamwork, responsibility, that are all really critical to building that civil society within a rural community. Oh, you're muted, Alicia.
Thank you. Maybe just a follow-up question. You talked about what this experience is like for the young people, but I wonder, could you speak a little bit about what the impact is on the community and on parents? How do they get involved, and do we see spillover effects in the community as well?
Yeah, great question. So, like I said, this isn't just about youth as beneficiaries. SBAE is not just about youth being the future farmers for future impact, but rather SBAE is about youth as change agents for impact today. So 2 years ago, actually, I was going to communities in Ghana and Liberia to interview students, teachers, agriculture teachers, and farmers to understand what the impact of school-based agricultural education, 4-H Ghana, 4-H Liberia, these programs in those countries. And what I saw, with youth and teachers were all what I expected to see. But then as I interviewed farmers, I really saw where the real economic and food security impact was. Farmers in every community that I visited told me how they were improving their yields by 50 to 150% based on what they were learning from 12 or 15-year-olds. In one community, Combe, Ghana, which is this very small village, has a junior high school at the most senior level of education that they have there. And I asked the principal if I could visit with farmers in the community. So he brought about 10 farmers into the faculty lounge of the junior high school. There were 2 teenage kids that were sitting at the back of the room who were both 4-H members. And I asked these farmers, what has been the impact of 4-H, of school-based agricultural education on you, on your lives? One farmer yells out, 25 by 75, which is the spacing in centimeters for maize. Another yelled out, 1 seed per hole. Another one said, the DuPont Pioneer seed. And I said, wait a minute. So like, you're telling me all these different agricultural methods or even technologies and this hybrid maize seed from DuPont, what was its impact on your own production? And the farmers said that with the hybrid maize seed, their production was 4 times what it was previously. Without the hybrid seed and just with the methods, their production was twice as much as what it was before. I said, that's tremendous. Who's teaching you? Where are you learning these things? And there was one lanky farmer who was very animated. He stood up next to me and he's kind of flailing his arms and he points back to the back of the room and said, they did it. The youth taught us. And I go, which youth? And he said, one farmer yelled, well, Ishmael taught me. Another one said, well, Quarshi taught me. Another one said, Grace taught me. So I found Ishmael after this little discussion with the farmers, and I asked him, I said, Ishmael, these farmers are crediting you with transforming their livelihoods. How did this happen? So I was walking through the community one day and I overheard a group of farmers complaining about their low yields. And so I walked up to them and said, I can help you get higher yields. I said, but you were a kid, 14 years old, and these were grown men. How did they receive you? He said, well, they hesitated at first, but they had seen the impact on the school demonstration farm and knew I had been educated, so they listened. He said, so I went with one farmer. I spent about 2 hours with him on his farm. I taught him what 4-H and my agriculture teacher taught me, and that was enough. And now this young man wants to be an agriculture extension officer.
Powerful story. Thanks, Trent, for sharing that. Just a reminder to everyone, we have one question in the Q&A box. I know that you have more questions than that, so start entering them now. And I do see the one question, and it's an important one. We will make sure to get to it. But I'm going to move forward here to Jack Elliott. Jack is the Regional Director for Africa at the Borlaug Institute at Texas A&M. And Jack, I think this is a perfect follow-on to Trent's story. You are the chair for the School-Based Ag Education Council for Research and Evidence at Texas A&M, so SBAE core. What do we already know about the efficacy and impact of school-based agricultural education from a historical perspective? How does it impact agriculture? And why is it important that we keep filling the evidence gaps?
I think the key thing on this is so I can have an opportunity to explain the theory behind what Trent just said. And so it's going to be in one sentence, and then I'll explain it. SBAE embraces a powerfully effective participatory transfer of technology pedagogical model. Wow, doesn't that sound like a professor? Okay, what it means is it works. It's been time tested for over 100 years, introducing content and knowledge that Trent identified through application and reinforcement. And that's the premise for SBAE. That allows for the transfer of technology. And I'm glad he brought up that story, because one of my questions was, how does that happen? That kids, youth, can be a transfer of technology, a change agent. Well, let me tell you my story. Can you imagine in today's world, a university president stepping down from that job to become a high school agriculture teacher? A little over 100 years ago, that's exactly what happened. A man by the name of Rufus Stimpson was president of now University of Connecticut. He stepped down from that role to be a high school agricultural teacher to test his theory of education. He figured the best way, now this is the key thing, he figured the best way to teach math and science and other core subjects was by application and by solving problems. That's the genesis, if you will, of the problem-solving approach that we use today. Students would bring their problems, and that 100 years ago, they were mostly agriculture, to school. And the lessons then revolved around solving those problems. Might be, what was this white curdly stuff in the milk? Mastitis. What was the damage to leaves and corn? And much like what Trent just explained in Ghana, the adults started to notice, because the children went to the county fairs with their produce, with their animals, and they were beating the adults. And so the adults started noticing. And so back then, that was the original transfer of knowledge, transfer of innovations, and it was done by this process that we use today. The SBAE evolved from this beginning, and research has shown that its pedagogical approach is still the premier educational delivery system. So we've started CORE, as you mentioned, the Council for Research and Evidence, and we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes, but we need to continue to build the evidence base. It's critical for many reasons. There's always room for growth and improvement, or as we say in the development world, monitoring and evaluation. Proof of concept is what our goal is. I've listened to many webcasts in the last few months on agriculture and youth and whatnot. Agriculture as a discipline, as a career, still has a poor reputation globally because of past experiences, outdated views of its potential and opportunities. So working with Humanitas and others on this school-based agricultural education, we can improve that reputation with clear and current local evidence, and that's kind of what goes back to what Phil talked about. The local evidence in Ghana or Liberia or Nigeria, we use that local evidence. It can be promoted as a viable solution that countries can use to build their economies and improve livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Elliott. Really appreciate your remarks, and we will come back to you to hear more. First, I'll go next to Nabiha Kazi. Nabiha is the founder of Humanitas and an advisor for the movement to advance school-based agriculture education. Nabiha, as I just mentioned, Humanitas Global is hosting the SBAE Secretariat to spark a global movement. Can you tell us more about what that Secretariat will be doing and why we need a movement for SBAE at this moment?
Yes, thanks, Alicia. And as you've noted, Humanitas Global is serving as a secretariat for the movement to advance school-based agricultural education. So what is it and why now? There are three core pillars to the movement. The first one is evidence. As Jack has shared, disseminating and sharing research and evidence that aligns to the work of SBAE CORE, which is the School-Based Agricultural Education Council of Research and Evidence. That's a long name, but this is under the leadership of Jack. The second is advocacy. So a coalition approach to driving advocacy for policy and program integration of SBAE and lifting up, which I think is critical, lifting up those community voices and the perspectives of those who benefited from and who've been part of school-based agricultural education. And the third core pillar for the movement is funding, is mobilizing and leveraging funding so we can build national and local capacity across the continent for the implementation of school-based agricultural education at scale. In terms of why now? Well, there have been many factors that have been shared by my esteemed panelists. And just to summarize, there are 4 critical ones that are at play that demonstrate the need. Because this movement, just like the content and the innovations that can be integrated into school-based agricultural education, is entirely responsive to the needs of communities. And so the 4 factors, one is Africa is at the forefront to help meet global food and nutrition needs of 9.7 billion people by 2050. That is recognized, that's undeniable. The second is the growing African demographic, the youth demographic, one where currently they are the majority and they will continue to be the majority, and over 2/3 of them are unemployed or underemployed. The third is investments in ag innovation, R&D, technology, from venture capital to bilateral, multilateral donors to private sector R&D and more, exceeds tens of billions of dollars. And then the fourth is the reality that the share of the ag labor force in the continent is in decline. So amidst this backdrop, there are big policy and donor bets on agriculture as that key driver to close the development divide and also end poverty, hunger, malnutrition for all and in our lifetime. But then the question is, who's going to do that work, right? How are we going to do it? The answer is clear. We have to unleash the intellectual and creative capital of Africa's youth, and we need to frame agriculture differently. Ag is a business. The pipeline absolutely should be fresh with innovation, but we also have to develop the workforce and transform how we plant and grow and harvest our food. And we have to make the sector appealing, viable, and profitable. I do think that we are short-sighted, and Trent alluded to this, if we believe that bringing youth into the mix is only about the future of ag. Yes, that's important, but youth are also influencers and change agents now, right? So school-based ag education enables youth to be part of the ag landscape today, bringing innovation and knowledge to farmers today, being advocates for better practices today, and seeing the fruits of their labor in one planting season today. It's empowering, practical, and absolutely life-changing. And that's what school-based agricultural education offers. There really is no more urgent and relevant time than now to take what has been effective for more than 100 years, as Jack has highlighted. I mean, we're not talking about proof of concept that needs further testing. We don't have to recreate the wheel. Let's take a proven approach and invest in building youth-focused pathways that meet youth where they live and where they learn. So in schools and in their very communities, for the adoption and sustained utilization of ag innovation and best practices to increase productivity, feed the world, and also do right by our planet.
Thanks, Nabiha. It's a powerful call to action. Appreciate that. And I'm going to give our panelists kind of a heads up on where I want to go with these audience questions now so we can prepare. Kwame, I'm going to come to you first, not with a panelist question, but with a follow-up question for you about the skills that we know that youth need. So I'm going to come to you first in a second, and then I'm just going to mention here to our panelists, Trent, I'm going to come to you about the question about the difference between school gardens, school feeding, and school-based agriculture, and I'm also going to ask you to speak to the question about how we make school-based agriculture gender sensitive and inclusive of girls. Nabiha, I'm going to come to you about the question of USAID's strategy and whether they should be including more of a focus on school-based agriculture education, which I think came in from Grace Burton. And then to you, Jack, I'm going to come and ask this question about the pedagogical approaches. So Blake Vanderkamp just asked a question about how to be an effective, how to effectively facilitate student growth. So I'll come to you on that one next. So our panelists can take a look at the questions and then come back. And actually, Nabiha, I'm not sure why, but the question from Grace disappeared, but it was about how USAID is going to be refreshing their strategy soon for Feed the Future. Should school-based agriculture education and youth play a more prominent role in that strategy? So we'll come to you about that. But first, I'm going to go back to Kwame. The question is here, when we think about youth development And people talk about different kinds of skills. We've heard it just now in what we presented in terms of school-based ag education and what it can provide. As you sort of look at what we need to do to equip young people and the kinds of jobs that are going to be available to them, do they need soft skills? Do they need hard skills? If they need soft skills, what skills are important? If they need hard skills, what skills are important? Are they equally important? And are we preparing them in the way that education is currently structured to do that? So if you could speak to that question. It's a bit broad, but I know that you can speak to this.
Alicia, thank you very much for that question. I just want to say that, you know, they need a combination of skills in order to be successful. So it's a combination of hard skills, industry-specific knowledge and skills, and also the soft skills, which is very critical. And I would say that the current educational system seems to be, I would say, relatively successful in providing the technical skills, but it hasn't done much when it comes to the soft skills. And that is one area where a lot of industry professionals complain about. But the soft skills is very foundational to acquiring those technical skills. And I'll give you an example of a conversation that I had with an executive at DuPont Pioneer. And he said, you know, no one comes to the job day one with all the skill set ready to work. We always have to take them through training and then train them to get the technical skills to work. But we cannot teach those technical skills if they don't have soft skills. So we can teach technical skills, but we cannot teach that if they don't have the soft skills. If they are not responsible enough to show up to work, or if they are not responsible enough to be able to stay on, if they don't have that critical thinking skill, they don't have those leadership skills, those are difficult to teach at the job place. And that is one area that I also feel that the school-based ag education plays an important role. The hands-on approach and that integrated approach that it has, it encourages the development of these soft skills, those leadership skills, those problem-solving skills, and those critical thinking skills. And that is where I see this particular model to play a significant role in developing the necessary human capital, as well as helping to enhance agricultural productivity on the continent.
Thank you. Very, very helpful. Trent, I'm going to go to you, and I'm actually going to read the questions out loud here. I just want to give you a heads up. So the first question is from Brett Ryerson. We see a huge need for post-harvest loss training in schools, awareness, techniques, yet we very rarely see it in any African school systems. How is SBAE different from current school garden or school feeding programs in Africa? And Brett is with Harvest Agricultural Solutions in Uganda. So that's the first question, if you could answer that. The second question that I also wanted you to speak to was about inclusion. I'm just scrolling here to find it. This is from Ella McGuire. How do we ensure school-based ag education is gender sensitive and inclusive, especially making sure young girls are being afforded equitable opportunities for this type of education and life skills? So if you could speak to those, that would be great.
Yeah, both great questions. And for those who've worked in Africa and worked closely with schools, you know that school gardens are nothing new. And school-based agricultural education is quite different than your traditional school garden or even school feeding program, which tends to be very teacher-centric rather than youth or even agricultural production focus. So many of your school gardens are ways to use students as free labor to be able to subsidize a teacher's salary. So they're working the school garden and producing vegetables that then the teachers end up taking home. And so it's a very teacher-centered type of method. It's also used oftentimes as a tool for punishment. And this is one of the reasons why across Sub-Saharan Africa, so many youth are not interested in agriculture. It's because their teachers are using the school garden as detention. Go work in the school garden, and that's your punishment for disrupting class. And so then this mindset begins to enter into kids' heads that, well, then my punishment for being poor is to be a farmer. And it becomes this negative mindset. School-based agricultural education turns all that upside down. It's student-centered. It focuses on youth outcomes, but also trains young people that not only is it for their benefit, but it also trains them to be change agents within the community. And they're working with adults, and adults see them and begin to respect them. I've had parents come up to me and say, now we send our kids to school so that we will know what they are learning in class, because we're learning from our kids. So it changes the dynamics of a lot of things, and that has a huge effect on girls and women, because we want to make sure that these school-based agricultural education programs are focused on gender equity, that young girls have equal opportunity to participate as boys, but not just equal opportunity, but also seeing it equitably, and understanding that there may be hindrances in the mindsets of teachers, which science or agriculture teachers are predominantly male, and helping those teachers overcome their own limiting beliefs on girls in science or girls in agriculture. We want to make sure that the leaders, elected leaders in 4-H, so 4-H Ghana a few years ago submitted a grant to the Gates Foundation, which they won, called the 5th H, HER. And it was there was no difference in programming, what they were doing through a school-based ag education model. They were just highlighting the impact that it was already having on girls, because they were 50% of the leadership of the executive officer teams for these rural communities. And whenever parents see their young girls stand before the community and recite an agriculture creed or opening ceremonies, or give a speech on agriculture, that begins to shift the mindsets of everyone within that community.
Thanks, Trent. And I remember you sending me a few years ago the winner of the 4-H creed in Ghana. It was a young girl who had a powerful reading of the FFA creed. If somebody can find that and put that in the chat, it's a really great watch for anybody who needs to be inspired today. Nabi, coming to you, the question about USAID and the inclusion of youth and a focus on school-based ag education. Could you speak to how important that would be and what that would do for the school-based ag education movement?
Sure, I love getting this question. USAID has been a tremendous leader and catalyst, from investments in Feed the Future Innovation Labs to funding and advocating and supporting innovation development in agriculture, to investments in food system strengthening. So USAID has been at the forefront. And I think a lot that has been accomplished has certainly been thanks to USAID's vision and support of communities. And I also want to highlight that USAID and USDA are funding key bodies of our work currently, and we're incredibly appreciative of that. But as we look bigger and recognizing this moment where the agency is looking to update or refresh its strategy and build on lessons learned, quite frankly, I think SBAE needs to be recognized as a powerful pathway to enable scaled uptake and impact of ag innovation, right? There are hundreds of millions of dollars that USAID taxpayer dollars have been invested to transform the agricultural landscape. And what are we going to do with that, right? So there is this intentionality on making sure that we are not only promoting a vibrant pipeline of innovation and discovery, but that we are also investing simultaneously in building those pathways where innovations and knowledge can be adopted and can flourish. So a system like school-based agricultural education actually does triple duty. It transforms ag, it transforms education, and it also builds a capable and competitive workforce. And so I guess, just to sum up, my wish would be that anything that USAID would be funding from an innovation, knowledge development, technology development perspective that USAID also be very intentional in its asks, in its RFPs, to say, all right, what's the pathway to drive uptake of this through youth and embrace school-based agricultural education, which has been part of the US agricultural fabric and also the agricultural fabric of so many countries around the world. As I said earlier, let's not recreate the wheel. Let's invest in things that have already worked for us.
Thanks, Nabiha. Thank you. Jack, I'm going to come to you with this question from Blake Vanderkamp. I'll just read it quickly. I'm currently serving as the Iowa FFA state reporter and will become a future agriculture educator by 2024. Thus, my question is, what do you believe is the best way for me to facilitate student growth so they can continue agricultural transformation in the future? There have been several different pedagogical approaches suggested, but what would you as a panel suggest to be the overarching essential takeaway for the future of agriculture education? So there's a lot there. You of anybody I think is best prepared to kind of answer this, but I think if you could speak to this and then maybe also talk about how CORE could be contributing to what the future of ag education actually might look like. So you can kind of give us a little bit more detail about CORE in addition to responding to this.
Okay, thank you, Blake. That's a very good question. And quite frankly, the basic premises of application and knowledge and reinforcement have served generations, and it's still applicable today. Sometimes we get in there and we say students are different today and all of that, but I have found that students respond very, very favorably, and here's the reason why. I'll go back to I was telling Kwani this the other day, I'll go back to my Michigan State days in the late 80s, early 90s, and I was visiting with the head of science education. And he was lamenting on our delivery process. He was saying, you guys have the answer. This is the head of science education at Michigan State. He said, we have the answer. And here's the response for you. And that is, the reason we have the answer is our delivery system is able to connect with all students. Listen to that. It connects with all students. It makes all students feel important. It addresses their learning styles. And so we go back to the premise, and let me just see if I can do this, share my screen real quick. Here's what I'm talking about. And Kwame mentioned that too. If you look at this chart and you look at the top one, which is career and tech ed, where school-based agricultural education is, and then there's three columns. The content, that's your knowledge, then you have application, and you have motivation. And it addresses all of those, and that means you're going to address all learning styles, all students who come to your classroom. If you look down at the very bottom, and this isn't all, but most academic classes deal with content. Sometimes it might have an application, but it's not built into their curriculum. It's not integral. And the motivation part, that doesn't really happen. And so I share this because you can see there's the domains of learning: cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. And we have so many students and so much of our society nowadays that are disenfranchised and marginalized, and it's because they don't learn the academic way. They may learn psychomotor or affective, which is more of a visual. And so I share that you have the answer, you have the support that you need to reach all students if that is your goal. Real quickly on CORE, it's a group of researchers and faculty who have demonstrated interest in SBAE in an international setting. I'm on it, Tobin Redwine, who's now moving to Viveix, on it, Nabia's on it, Chris Udry out in Northwestern University's on it, and he's actually conducting a random control design study in Liberia right now. It's really fascinating to get that evidence. Holly Trainey from Oregon State's been invited. Daniel and Melanie Foster from Penn State have been invited. We've been meeting by Zoom. We met by Zoom before the COVID-19. We also plan to meet at conferences as pre or post, just to have a face-to-face. But the key thing that we've done is we have adopted the diffusion of innovation model, for those of you who are researchers, and adapted it within a logic model framework to help guide our work. And that's really critical, because where we just went with what Trent was talking about and others is that this is far more than growing a garden. And nothing against growing a garden, but it's the difference between process and product. Okay, we are about the process. Most of the time school gardens have some process, but it's mostly about the product. Let's have a lunch, let's have lettuce and those kind of things. Ours is we use the product within the process, and then have growing leaders and improving community livelihoods. Those are really the keys in terms of all of this, what we're looking at in terms of the core research. We want to build evidence so that we can support the Secretariat. We want to disseminate and help amplify school-based agricultural education on the continent, again, supporting the Secretariat and helping get enough evidence that when the Secretariat puts an online platform up, a knowledge center, if you will, that we have some evidence that will stand the test of time on that. So hopefully that addresses your question, Blake, and then that deals with the core issue. So thank you.
Thanks, Jack. I think you covered it well. And I'm just looking at the time, so I realize we're probably approaching our last round of Q&A because I want to wrap up in time for Phil to be able to close us out and respect all of your time to end on time. Just to give the panelists a sense of what I'm going to do. Kwame, I'm going to come to you first and actually ask, I have a question that I'm going to ask. If you tell me you don't want to answer it and you'd rather give final remarks on something else, that's fine, which is there a major myth about youth in agriculture that you would like to address? So think about that for a second. I feel like there's a lot of myth busting that maybe needs to happen around youth in agriculture or youth in Africa. So that's for you. Trent, I'm going to come to you next after Kwame, and there's a question that's specific about getting involved in Liberia that I feel like might be good for you to answer, that was put forward. I'll try to find it in the Q&A, but basically we have somebody who's Liberian who's looking to get involved in ag education back in Liberia. And I also want to not forget this important question that happened early on, which is how can young people, we have somebody from the Global Youth Institute asking, what would you recommend for or call upon students who are global youth that are interested in supporting agriculture? What can they do to make a difference? So I feel like that's a great question to ask of you. And then Nabiha, I want to finish with a call to action from you about what people can do to support the movement for school-based ag education. So we'll go through that. I'd also encourage people to pay attention to the chat. There's a lot of email addresses being exchanged. So if we don't get to your question live, it's very likely you can follow up with email with one of us. So Kwame, over to you first about myth busting. Is there anything that you feel like you want to make sure that people hear?
Alicia, thank you very much for that question. I think I will start by speaking to this whole narrative that young people are not even interested in the agricultural sector to begin with, which I think it's somewhat a myth from the standpoint that I personally believe that young people are not interested in any particular sector. They just want something that is profitable and something that is productive for the energy that they are going to put in. And I believe that even those same young people who we believe are streaming out of rural areas in Africa trying to migrate to Europe, essentially leave agriculture, goes to places like Italy, and they go and they pluck tomatoes. The difference is it's profitable in those particular areas. Another one that I also want to highlight is the narrative that we now have only older people that are being left on the farming, and the typical number that is thrown around is the average age of the farmer in Africa is about 60 years old, which from our analysis of 6 countries, we realize that the average age of working age individuals that are engaged in the agricultural sector ranges from about 32 in Uganda to about 39 in Nigeria. So there's a large number of young people that are already engaged in the agricultural sector. That is a sector for most rural youth. I think where the constraint is that we are missing those young people who have the skill set to identify the numerous opportunities that exist in agriculture and are able to engage in agriculture in a more productive way for their to support their livelihood. And I think that is where an effort is needed to be able to address that. And I would also want to say this. And I know a number of the panelists have also highlighted this issue, that the days when youth, especially in Africa, were considered the future leaders, I think it was yesterday. Right. Africa's present now and its immediate future is very useful. And these young people are already shaping transformation on that continent. And my experiences working across the continent convinces me that this generation of young people are right for that kind of investment. And if we are willing to invest those resources in them, you will be able to transform them to become allies in addressing present global challenges. And I see the difference between myself and many young people in Africa is just opportunity. And if we provide that opportunity, we will be able to transform them. And I'll lastly say that we don't just have to invest in them, we need to invest with them. No one knows the youth challenges than they do. So we need to make sure that we give them that voice and bring them to the table when we are trying to find solutions that is of concern to them. So thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much. And that perfectly tees us up. I mean, Trent, we have really anxious youth who want to participate, asking questions in the chat about how they can be involved. And I found the comment I was looking for, Tyrus, who mentioned here that he's a student intern in agro-studies, agriculture capacity building in Israel. How can he get involved in Liberia? What are the opportunities either with AgriCorps or more generally that you would encourage youth to be pursuing to support agriculture?
Yeah, well, in Liberia in particular, right now, 4-H Liberia is in 150 junior high schools, 150 communities. We have each of that 150 schools is divided into 10 different regions where there is a field officer who is like an extension agent who is overseeing 15 different schools and bringing in new methods, new technologies, advising agriculture teachers, helping them become better teachers, working with parents and the PTA, helping local farmers. So they're kind of like an extension agent, but just focused on 15 schools and communities. But this is all part of a larger randomized controlled trial. Dr. Elliott mentioned a little bit earlier, Chris Udry, who is an economist, former chair of economics at Yale, who is the founder of the Global Poverty Research Lab at Northwestern University, is has developed and is leading the research for this RCT, randomized controlled trial. In Liberia, we have 100 treatment schools and 100 control schools. And the treatment is simply a school-based agricultural education 4-H program in a junior high. And at the end of a 3 to 5 year period, we will come back to measure the impact of SBAE, both on youth outcomes, but also on adoption rates of farmers of improved agricultural technologies and methodologies. So there's a lot of cool things that are happening in Liberia right now, specifically with 4-H Liberia, and we are always looking for new partners to come on to help build a more robust program there.
Thanks, Trent. That's a great call to action. Nabiha, I'm gonna let you close us out here. So hopefully people are excited now and they want to be a part of this. So how can they get involved in the movement, and what can different institutions and people do to support this?
Great, well, it's quite simple. Reach out to the Secretariat. In the Q&A, I've included the contact email, in the chat function. So join us. It's an opportunity for all sectors, organizations of all sizes to join us for this movement. You know, I don't think we can wrap up without recognizing that this year marks the 50th anniversary of Dr. Borlaug receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. And he's famously known for the phrase, "take it to the farmer." But there's something else that was always top of mind for Dr. Borlaug and his scientists. You see, I may not have worked with Dr. Borlaug, but I grew up in his and in Simit's influence with my father directing Dr. Borlaug's Wheat White Crosses program for almost 30 years. And upon research and breeding achievements, the immediate question was, what are you going to do with this knowledge? What are you going to do with these scientific achievements? This morning, Dr. Ruben Echeverria, who was the former DG of CIAT, which is a CG center, said good ideas need to land on the ground, and that's where we need to focus. So the stars are absolutely aligned from a policy need and a community demand perspective for school-based agricultural education. The next 24 months for the Secretariat and our partners are really crucial for us to be responsive to this demand, to this need. And there are three core needs that stand out. The first one is making school-based ag education part of ag market development plans. So we need those who are working on and funding innovations and better agricultural practices to add school-based ag education as part of innovation uptake plans. So school-based agricultural education should be part of strategic market development efforts with dedicated focus and funding. And as I mentioned before, I think it needs to be part of proposals, part of work plans from the outset. The second is that we need your voice. We need voices from those on the front lines who are working day in and day out to transform the agricultural landscape. And there's also the role of other sectors. We need other sectors, namely education and the business sectors, because school-based agricultural education is a mechanism to transform how teachers teach and how students learn. So school-based ag education, as Jack has highlighted, Trent has highlighted, is experiential. It's an opportunity to integrate science, math, language, history, but it also builds critical skills of teamwork, of critical thinking, of public speaking, and more. So the benefits of going through the process that Jack highlighted. So while the intention of school-based agricultural education is to develop and retain youth in the ag sector, it's these skills and these learnings, they apply to each and every sector, each and every career. So school-based ag education can also revolutionize education and build a highly effective workplace. And third, we need funding. We need funding for capacity building, funding for community access to game-changing innovations. Far too many innovations do not make it to the ground, so we've got to be intentional about opening those doors and investing in those doors. The third is funding for policy engagement, policymaker engagements. How do we create an enabling policy environment for school-based agricultural education to really thrive? Implementing and disseminating impact-focused research as part of SBAE core, but even beyond that. And then the last one is funding for the Secretariat and the core bodies of our work to propel this work forward. I'm going to ask Trent to weigh in on this. I do want to say that the Secretariat is very fortunate to have AgriCorps, USAID, USDA, the World Bank, and the National Science Foundation funding key bodies of work. But there's so much more to do, and I hope we can do that together. But I'm going to hand it over to Trent so he can elaborate.
Yeah, thanks, Namia. And I'm the founder of AgriCorps, but I've also been the main donor over the past 2 years. And AgriCorps has shifted from a one-off program-driven model to a highly levered movement that is ultimately about transferring SBAE from a donor-driven program to a government-owned and funded institution. So my philanthropy, and I've committed to donate $1 million over 4 years to AgriCorps and the movement for school-based agricultural education, is leveraged with funds, as Nabia mentioned, from USAID, the World Bank, National Science Foundation, USDA, all with the intent to bring greater rigor of evidence to this model we've been talking about, to ultimately find permanent homes within ministries of agriculture and education across Sub-Saharan Africa. As a philanthropist, as an investor, I'm investing in the long-term impact with significant bang for my buck. This allows my dollar to be stretched out and be leveraged against many other partners, and we invite you to join the movement, whether that's as a funding partner or as an agricultural resource to join the movement, or as a development implementer on the ground. We invite you to be part of this movement as well.
Thanks, Trent. And I just want to thank the whole panel. I realize I've gone a little over here, but we've gotten really great comments from the participants that your energy and your insights have been so appreciated, and it's been a pleasure for me to be able to moderate today's conversation. So I want to pass it back over to Phil to wrap us up.
I think Phil is
You're muted, Phil.
Thank you very much, Alicia. With that, we're going to bring this to a close. And before doing so, I want to say another thank you, both to our presenters and to our participants, because this has been really wonderful to watch the information flow back and forth. You know, the World Food Prize is an annual opportunity to reflect on some of the biggest successes and challenges confronting agriculture on a global scale. And we are grateful for this opportunity to have a conversation adjacent to the World Food Prize. I hope that you and each of you in the days and weeks and months ahead will reflect on youth as catalysts for agricultural transformation and consider ways that your organization can reinforce this effort. So thank you all very much and have a wonderful evening.